There's a certain kind of evening that unfolds inside All in the Family where nothing dramatic is supposed to happen. No big event is scheduled. No special guest is expected. And yet the room feels like it's waiting for something anyway. Like the air itself knows that a conversation is about to turn into something heavier than anyone planned. And in this particular kind of episode, the shift begins so quietly that you almost miss it. Just a small comment. A passing observation about something changing in the world outside. Maybe a news story. Maybe something Gloria brings up casually. Maybe something Mike frames as progress. And at first it just floats there like any other topic that might come and go. But then Archie hears it, and that's when the tone begins to tighten. It doesn't happen all at once, not in a way that feels explosive. It's more like a slow tightening of grip. The way someone holds onto something just a little firmer when they feel it slipping. And Archie's reaction isn't immediate anger. It's resistance, quiet at first, expressed through a kind of dismissiveness that sounds almost casual, like he's brushing something off that doesn't deserve attention. But the more the conversation continues, the clearer it becomes that he isn't brushing it off at all. He's pushing back against it, not because he's trying to win an argument, but because something about the idea itself unsettles him. And that's where the episode really starts to breathe, because instead of rushing into a confrontation, it lets that discomfort settle into the room. It lets Archie sit with it for a moment, even if he doesn't acknowledge it directly, and it lets the others respond in their own ways, each of them bringing a different kind of energy into the space. Mike, of course, leans into it, not aggressively, not immediately, but with that steady confidence that comes from believing that change is not only necessary but inevitable. And he frames his responses in a way that invites discussion, or at least attempts to. But what's interesting is that the more calmly he speaks, the more Archie seems to feel cornered, as if calmness itself is a kind of pressure, a quiet insistence that things are shifting whether he's ready or not. Gloria feels it too, though in a more emotional way, because for her this isn't just about ideas. It's about the tension between the world she grew up in and the one she's trying to live in now. And when Archie reacts defensively, it doesn't just feel like disagreement. It feels personal, like a refusal to acknowledge the direction she's moving in. And that creates its own kind of frustration, one that builds slowly, the kind that doesn't explode right away but lingers in every word she chooses. And then there's, moving gently through all of it, not trying to stop the conversation, not trying to take control, but trying to soften the edges of it, trying to keep everyone connected even as the tension rises. And what's remarkable is how her presence changes the tone without changing the content. She doesn't erase the disagreement. She doesn't resolve anything, but she makes it possible for the conversation to continue without completely breaking apart. But Archie keeps coming back to that same place, that same defensive posture, and the more you listen to him, the more you realize that it's not just about the specific issue being discussed. It's about what that issue represents to him, the feeling that something familiar is being questioned. Something he's relied on is being reframed. And instead of engaging with that uncertainty directly, he pushes against it. He reinforces his perspective. He repeats himself in different ways, not because he lacks ideas, but because repetition feels stable, it feels solid, It feels like something he can stand on. And that's where the humor starts to emerge, not as a release from the tension, but as part of it, because the way Archie reacts, the way he circles back to his points, the way he tries to reassert control over the conversation, it becomes almost rhythmic, almost predictable. And there's something funny about that predictability, something that makes you smile even as you feel the discomfort underneath it. Because the show doesn't let you escape that discomfort. It doesn't cut away. It doesn't soften the moment with unrelated jokes or distractions. It stays right there in the living room, letting the conversation unfold in real time, letting the tension stretch and bend and reshape itself as each person responds. And that's what makes it feel so different from other sitcoms, especially from that era. Back in the early 1970s, television wasn't really known for this kind of honesty, not for letting characters sit in unresolved disagreement, not for allowing conversations to feel this personal, this messy. And that's why this show felt so groundbreaking, because it trusted the audience to sit with that discomfort, to recognize it, to laugh at parts of it without needing everything to be neatly resolved. And in this episode, that trust is especially clear, because there's no attempt to soften Archie's defensiveness into something more acceptable, no attempt to turn his reactions into something easily forgivable. Instead, the show presents them as they are, shaped by his worldview, shaped by his sense of identity, shaped by the time he grew up in. And it lets you see both the limitations of that perspective and the vulnerability behind it. Because underneath all that defensiveness, there's something else, something quieter, something that doesn't get expressed directly but is always present, the fear that comes with change, the uncertainty of not knowing where you fit anymore, the discomfort of feeling like the world is moving in a direction you don't fully understand. And that's what makes Archie such a compelling character, even when he's at his most frustrating, because his reactions aren't just about stubbornness. They're about trying to protect something, even if he can't fully articulate what that something is. Mike challenges that constantly, not just through disagreement, but through persistence, through the refusal to let the conversation stay one-sided. And that creates a kind of ongoing friction that never quite resolves. It just shifts. It changes shape. It moves from one point to another, always circling back to the same underlying tension. Gloria adds another layer to it, because her frustration isn't just intellectual, it's emotional, it's tied to her relationship with Archie, to the expectations she feels from him, to the way his defensiveness can feel like a rejection of her perspective. And that makes her responses sharper, more urgent, more personal. And as always, becomes the emotional center, not by taking sides, but by maintaining a kind of openness that allows the others to keep engaging, even when the conversation becomes difficult, and her kindness doesn't solve anything, but it changes the atmosphere. It creates small moments where the tension eases just enough for everyone to keep talking. And that's really what this episode is about, not the issue itself, not the specifics of the debate, but the act of talking through change, the way people react when their beliefs are challenged, the way defensiveness can shape a conversation, the way humor can emerge from that tension without ever fully resolving it. As the episode moves toward its later moments, there's no big turning point, no moment where Archie suddenly understands everything, no scene where Mike convinces him to see things differently. Instead, there's a gradual slowing down, a kind of conversational fatigue that settles in, not because the issue has been resolved, but because the energy required to maintain that level of defensiveness can't last forever. And in that slowing down, there's a different kind of honesty, a quieter kind, where the characters aren't trying as hard to prove their points, where the conversation becomes less about winning and more about existing in the same space despite the disagreement. And that's where the episode finds its emotional weight, not in resolution, but in continuation, in the idea that these conversations don't end neatly. They don't wrap up with clear answers. They just become part of the ongoing dynamic between the characters, part of the way they relate to each other over time. It's a kind of storytelling that feels almost radical in its simplicity, because it doesn't rely on plot twists or dramatic revelations. It relies on the truth of human interaction, on the way people talk and react and push back and soften and try again. And that's why it still feels relevant today, because those dynamics haven't changed. They've just taken on new forms, new contexts, new issues. Watching it now, you can see how much of modern conversation it anticipated. The way discussions about change can become personal. The way defensiveness can shape the tone of a room. The way humor can exist alongside discomfort, not to erase it, but to make it bearable. And personally, I think that's what makes this kind of episode so powerful. The way it trusts you to sit with it, to feel the tension without needing it to be resolved, to recognize the characters not as symbols of ideas, but as people trying to navigate something complicated in the only way they know how. By the time it ends, there's no sense of closure in the traditional sense, no final statement that ties everything together, just a quiet continuation, a sense that the conversation will pick up again, maybe tomorrow, maybe in a slightly different form, but with the same underlying dynamics still in place. And that lingering feeling, that sense that nothing has been fully settled, is what stays with you, because it mirrors something real, something ongoing, something that doesn't fit neatly into the structure of a typical sitcom, but feels deeply true to the way people actually interact. It leaves you thinking not about who was right or wrong, but about why they reacted the way they did, about what drives defensiveness, about how change feels from different perspectives, and about the ways people try to hold onto what feels familiar even as everything around them shifts. And maybe that's why it still resonates, why it still sparks conversation, because it doesn't give you answers. It gives you something to sit with, something to reflect on, something that feels both specific to its time and completely timeless at the same moment.